both to those here in Dyson House and to those joining us tonight remotely. I'm Richard. I'm President of AIIA Victoria. And first, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past.
I'm delighted to welcome back to the Institute one of our most distinguished fellows, Mr. Rowan Callick, no stranger to many of us. Rowan's run a series of events here over the past 2 years, all dedicated to widening and deepening our understanding of China, its Communist Party, its relations with the West, Russia, and Taiwan, and why all this matters to us. And of course, there are
people today with such in-depth knowledge of China, given his many years examining the country, its Communist Party, and its leaders. He's one of our most insightful and deep-thinking journalists who spent many years in Beijing and Hong Kong, and has also written and published extensively on this hugely important subject. Tonight, he's going to examine the impact of the recent 20th Communist Party Congress, Xi Jinping's consolidation of power, and Xi's vision for the China of the future. Please welcome our speaker.
Thanks very much, Richard. Thanks everyone for joining us here in real person, and thank you for joining us online, everyone too. Thank you. I'm going to talk about these things that Richard mentioned, important things. Xi Jinping is at the peak of his power, and he believes so is his country and his party. He said at the end of last year, in today's world, if you want to say which political party, which country, and which nation can be confident, then the Communist Party of China, the People's Republic of China, and the Chinese nation have the most reason to be confident. In General Secretary Xi's work report to the 20th Party Congress held last month in Beijing, and I hope everyone here has their copy. Yes? No? So here we are. 63 pages of A4 in the English translation, easily obtained online. Very important. This is the blueprint. And it's called Hold High the Great Banner of Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, and strive in unity to build a modern socialist country in all respects. Very important text. In that, he says, the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is now on an irreversible historical course. He continues to claim, of course, also that the West is declining, the East is rising. Thesis that comes particularly out of the global financial crisis, when Xi and the party felt this is the end of Western ascendancy, and the West is going to continue to decline now. This is a hinge point of history. And the Chinese economy, pretty well bulletproof. We can't really hurt it. And so the changes that Xi has made to the economy have come in that understanding of the economy is going to sail through, however much we change things, however many party branches we insert in every institution, every private company to determine strategic directions and key personnel. The East will keep rising. And yet, in this work report, he also said that the world has entered, these are all quotes, the world has entered a new period of turbulence and change. A backlash against globalization is rising. The global economy is sluggish. We face many deep-seated problems regarding reform, development, and stability that cannot be avoided or bypassed. The hegemonic, high-handed, and bullying acts of using strength to intimidate the weak, taking from others by force and subterfuge, subversion, sabotage, and separatist, the hegemonic, high-handed and bullying acts of using strength to intimidate the weak, taking from others by force and subterfuge, playing zero-sum games. I wonder who he's thinking. I observe them play armed. External efforts to suppress and contain China may escalate at any time, as may various Black Swan and Grey Rhino events. We will crack down hard on infiltration, sabotage, subversion, and separatist activities by hostile forces. We will become more adept at deploying our military forces on a regular basis and in diversified ways. The world has once again reached a crossroads in history. Close quotes. Thus, the necessity for the party to abandon its conventions and organizational structures of the last 40 years that were aimed at balancing party factions, at creating meritocratic and predictable governance, at ensuring the smooth succession of top leaders, and especially preventing any Mao Zedong-style descent into dictatorship. Xi shared with his comrades at the Congress the alarm bells that are ringing in his ears, and delivered his prescription for calming their anxieties. More of the same, especially more of him. Quotes, China is a socialist country of people's democratic dictatorship. He affirmed, let us harness our indomitable fighting spirit to open up new horizons for our cause. We all know now where China is heading then for the next 10 years at least, even more deeply, more fervently into Xi country, whose horizons are becoming boundless. The enduring image from the Congress is that of Xi's dismissive demeanor as his perplexed-looking 79-year-old predecessor, Hu Jintao, who'd been sitting next to him in the front row, was led out to the closing ceremony for reasons that may never be revealed. The lack of empathy shown to Hu, his white hair signaling his irrelevance compared with the overwhelmingly black-dyed new power elite in their 60s, including Xi, underlined the cultural chasm between the Leninist party and traditional Chinese values that venerate the elderly. Xi's stilly disregard has been compared with the style of a mafia boss, with which he is acquainted since he has listed The Godfather among his favorite films. Party leaders conventionally worry that to show emotion or to solicit support, say by making their speeches entertaining, is perceived as demonstrating weakness. Xi filled at the Congress the 4 slots that he opened on the party's top body, the 7-man Politburo Standing Committee, with die-hard personal loyalists, led by his former Chief of Staff, Li Qiang, who as Shanghai Party Secretary had presided over that city's chaotic zero-COVID lockdowns and will now become almost certainly the next premier. The 4 new PSC members are all over 60, thus none are conventionally deemed young enough to be eligible successors to Xi in 5 years at the 21st Congress. So Xi seems set to continue for another 10 years until 2032 at least. The core Congress message is clear. The world is turning so sour, we require a steady and ideologically robust helmsman to steer party and country safely for a further generation. Our course is correct, but we are surrounded by troublemakers orchestrated by Washington. Political scientist Wu Guoguang has described how such authoritarian, one will probably say today totalitarian legitimization, quotes, focuses on power domination, institutional manipulation, and symbolic performance, close quotes. The convention that those aged 67 or under would stay in office, those over 68 would retire, and that top jobs would be limited to 2 terms was abandoned at the Congress. Premier Li Keqiang and PSC member Wang Yang, both 67, and Vice Premier Hu Chunhua, aged 59, all members of Hu Jintao's Tuanpai or Youth League faction, were ousted. Xi, who is 69, packed the party's central committee, with personal followers, replacing 68% of full members compared with 41% turning over at the last Congress. Members of ethnic minorities were almost halved. The governor and party secretary of the central bank, People's Bank, were also stood down, although aged 64 and 66. And since then, the deputy governor has been accused of corruption. So the central bank's experienced hands, who have with some difficulty prevented monetary crises for the last difficult decade, are all booted out and replaced by Xi loyalists. An official report noted that in choosing the party's new leadership team, there was a focus on whether they, quotes, whether they were brave and good at fighting against the US and Western sanctions and safeguarding national security, close quotes. Those promoted under Xi have almost all worked with him, or at least in the same regions, inevitably infecting decision-making with court politics. So on Xi rolls atop what he calls the wheels of history into a third five-year term that implies, as China expert Ian Johnson says, not so much stability as an ossification of the political system, with advisors telling him what he wants to hear. Work report rhetoric and the embedded slogans are not to be confused with parliamentary-style policy statements or strategies. They're rather, as Lancaster University professor Zheng Jinghan explains, a means of focusing attention and exhorting to action. Xi's report highlights his own special concerns: ideology, history, and education, stressing in it that the most basic aim of education is to foster virtue. We will encourage our talent to love the party. He defines ideological work as forging the soul of the nation, and such history is not in the past. As the China Media Project's David Banzersky said, it's a political text drafted by the party. Xi's report stressed that the party, thus the PRC, which it owns, is staying the course already set with his decisive, as it was titled, 19th Congress report. No backtracking, no resetting, no sign of stepping back from the zero COVID policies that keep China locked up. And it's quite interesting to see what's been emerging about those how the COVID zero has been implemented. Carrying out draconian zero COVID policy has proven an effective way for party secretaries to prove their loyalty to Xi. So, for example, they've indulged in what's called, in some quite a few townships and cities, dynamic clearance, a process in which COVID positive cases and those in contact with them, including families living in the same building, are put on coaches and transferred to a different administrative zone. The authorities can thus declare they've realised the government's goal of achieving zero cases, at least in the area for which they're responsible. And those who refuse to cooperate can be detained or fined and may end up with a criminal record. And so you can see videos of people queuing up in rows to get onto the buses. They're shown sealed inside the buses with the windows locked, air conditioning turned off to prevent transmission. People who are being relocated don't eat or drink for hours because they're not allowed off the bus to use the loo. Often their destination is an unfinished building with walls and floors of bare concrete. On the 18th of September, a bus transferring citizens out of Guiyang, out of the administrative region of that party secretary, rolled off the highway. 27 people were killed. Almost all of them had tested negative for COVID, but were on the bus because one or more cases had been detected in their community. And by extension, in the bigger picture, the party is battening down hatches against an increasingly wary world as it tightens its own grip on every institution in China. But Xi's new era is also now that of peak party as it enters its second century and of peak economy for China, reinforces Xi's need to speed up efforts to ensure the world becomes safe for the party, while it still retains the leverage, especially by weaponizing its economic ubiquity to get results. Common prosperity, viewed as Xi's core current domestic program, favouring public over private sector, garnered only 7 mentions in the work report, but they set the tone about the economy. Liu Xiangxi, the president of the Chinese Academy of Physical Sciences, has explained that common prosperity presents a dilemma. Quotes, the economy needs focus on efficiency, while society needs to focus on fairness. What's to be done? Close quotes. Well, Xi doesn't really give an answer. The word for security is used 91 times in the work report and economy 60 times. Battle gets 46 mentions. Political reform, once given a special section of its own in work reports, has gone altogether. Andrew Batson of GAFCO Research says the balance of priorities is tilting it towards security and away from progress. She wants to speed up efforts, as he said, quote, speed up efforts to achieve greater self-reliance in science and technology, from which he is seeking better strategic input, and to ensure the security of food, energy and resources, as well as key industrial and supply chains through self-sufficiency. This points to an intensification of what European Chamber of Commerce in China President Jörg Woodcock has lamented as ideological constraints and uncertainties, producing an unpredictable climate for business. Deng introduced an era of reform and opening up. Vestiges remain of the former, but the latter is fast vanishing, while demographic decline compounds these economic challenges. The dangerous context of this Congress, as she outlined, helps justify Xi's hallmark governance style of launching campaigns, then institutionalizing them to seal in and extend their value for him. One example is the campaign against disloyalty, often branded as corruption, which has spawned the massive and permanent National Supervisory Commission. Another is the all-out people's war against COVID, outlined in the work report, which has produced the traffic light app that is already being used to confine to their homes people who are perceived to be politically troublesome. The PRC, she has said, has been confronted with external attempts to blackmail, contain, blockade, and exert minimum pressure. The answer, he says, involves, characteristically for the party, quotes, focusing on internal political concerns. The former Foreign Minister Chen Shih-chen once explained pithily that for the PRC, foreign policy is the extension of domestic policy. Xi proclaimed in his new report, we have shown a fighting spirit. And since the Congress, former ambassador to Australia, Ma Jiaoshu, now a vice foreign minister, has reinforced the need to evince that spirit also externally, as directed by what's called Xi Jinping thought on diplomacy. The new champion of this Xi-plomacy, as some people call it, will be Wang Yi, appointed to the Politburo, although aged 69. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs Party Secretary, Qi Yu, widely credited with driving the diplomats' new fighting spirit, has been appointed to the party's Central Committee, as has the American ambassador Jin Gang, formerly Xi's protocol chief, who's expected to become the new foreign minister. Xi says that when he was elevated, the party had suffered weak, hollow, and watered down leadership, with some lacking confidence in the socialist political system. In response, he says, we rolled up our sleeves and got down to work, carry out a great struggle, to use one of his favorite words. We have placed an emphasis on political commitment in selecting officials. There is no end to theoretical innovation. Indeed, there's not. But we must never waver in upholding the basic tenets of Marxism. The Chinese path to building a strong military is growing ever broader, he says, with key goals set for the centenary in 2027 of the People's Liberation Army, which of course is the party's army and not the nation's. My view is that despite speculation, there's no evidence really that these 2027 goals are yet led by seizing Taiwan. My own worst case scenario there is that the party, after giving up on persuading the Taiwanese population to sign up to any kind of one country, two systems deal, determines to take Taiwan anyway in a form of vacant possession, disregarding casualties and disabling or removing potential leaders. Its success in subjugating Hong Kong very quickly through the national security law provides a model of holding down a potentially hostile population. My friend Steve Jung, director of the China Centre at SOAS at London University, wrote recently that Xi will try to take Taiwan. He sees it as sacred Chinese territory, must be united with the fatherland to fulfill his China dream. He also sees it as geostrategically critical, as it's centrally located in the first island chain, the securing of which will bankrupt the long-standing US Indo-Pacific strategy with the defense alliance with Japan as its cornerstone. Taking Taiwan is a game changer for China to displace the US as the global hegemon, Chung says. He says that if the West should fail to sustain sanctions on Russia over the invasion of Ukraine, China cannot be deterred. If she sees that an attack on Taiwan, though, will lead to sanctions that will destroy China's economy, thus threaten his hold and the party's hold on power, he's likely to play safe. Here's a difference between Xi and Putin, of course. Xi is a true believer in the party. He, I believe, would do anything for the party. And Putin is a believer in himself and Holy Mother Russia, something rather different. I do believe that Xi would not wish to imperil the party's continued control of China. So, but if if, however, the West should fail to sustain these sanctions on Russia, it's impossible to deter China because although not taking Taiwan will be hugely disappointing for Xi, it's preferable to losing power. But for economic deterrence to work, the side to be deterred must feel that its losses will be intolerably devastating. The key is to make economic interdependence lopsided and to one's advantage. It means selective and strategic, but not full decoupling. That's the Jung thesis, which I think is quite a sane one. Xi vowed at the Congress to strengthen party building in the PLA and to deepen the system of ultimate responsibility that rests with the chairman of the Central Military Commission, who happens to be Xi Jinping, of course. He recognizes that a capable fighting force requires more than loyalty. It's also the intensification of military training that will enable China's, quote, heroic fighting force to win local wars, Xi said. The new six-man leadership of the CMC underlines the focus on modernization of the military and of its force structure, and of elevating leaders viewed as expert on areas crucial for an invasion of Taiwan, including General He Weidong, now one of Xi's two vice chairmen, whose integration of PLA operations in the Eastern Theater Command was credited with the rapid display of combined force, triggered by Nancy Pelosi's recent visit to Taiwan. His comrade vice chair, General Zhang Youxia, served alongside Xi's father in the Chinese Civil War and has that rare quality, combat experience, having fought in the failed attempt to invade Taiwan, Vietnam in 1979, the last significant outing for the PLA. Underlining the disinterest of Beijing in what Chinese people think, as well as many Hong Kongers continue to think. She asserts that the one country, two systems formula remains not only relevant for subjugated Hong Kong, but also for reunification with Taiwan, whereas 90% of people polled there consistently stress its irrelevance. She, who often advances a form of ethnic race theory with the so-called Han at the top of the tree, insists about Taiwan that blood runs thicker than water, a generalization that excises the 600,000 indigenous peoples of Taiwan, which she states coldly is China's Taiwan. He praised in his speech his work report, The United Front, the party's effective instrument to advance its interests by influencing or controlling networks and key individuals, both inside China and overseas. He pledged to strengthen our work to encourage all the sons and daughters of the Chinese nation, meaning all people of Chinese ethnicity, wherever they're born, to form a powerful joint force for advancing the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Religions in China, he said, must be Chinese in orientation and must adapt to socialist society. Party members, of course, are required to be atheists. There are 97 million party members, most of them today officials and managers. Just 27% of the Congress delegates were women. She appointed no woman to the new 24-man Politburo, and no woman has ever joined its standing committee in the party's 101 years. Party members already compulsorily answering daily hour-long online questionnaires via their Tracy Chambo apps must also now undertake programs on the party's new theory to build it into a Marxist party of learning. Their attentiveness, he said, will be reinforced by political inspections and follow-up rectifications. How the hearts of party members must sink when they hear this. They're now required to view 80 hours of video instructions about Xi thought by the end of November, added to all the other stuff that they're now required to do. When schools went back in China in September, students found a new textbook, student book of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And there's 4 editions of these textbooks. The primary school, junior and senior high students. On the cover of all of them are quotes from Xi Jinping. The Ministry of Education requires the integration of Xi lessons not only into Chinese language and history classes, but into mathematics, physics, geography, and PE. The textbook for the lower years at primary school, so grade 1, includes I Follow the Communist Party Wholeheartedly, which has a section titled Grandpa Xi Cares About the People. As the party cannot now return to its conventions to restrain leaders, and the chances of an orderly eventual leadership succession have been sharply reduced. At the Congress, she raised the stakes. It's not now a game anyone can easily exit or stand aside from, however distant from China itself, as even Solomon Islanders have recently learned. So, bet or jeu, place your bets, as she rolls the dice again. Since the Congress, she has sought to double down on China's surge towards global power. This has long been the CCP modus operandi, pushing swiftly after important meetings have consolidated its domestic grip to intensify its hold on foreign partners, with the overall aim, as ever, of making the world safe for itself. The leaders of Germany, Vietnam, Pakistan, and Tanzania rushed to Beijing to greet Xi in the following days, showing, said Global Times, that more and more countries are optimistic about China's future development. This rush also revealed which countries and leaders seem most anxious about their own futures and most eager to solicit special favors from Beijing. Xi Jinping told German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, for instance, that their nation should unite for peace in a chaotic world. On the eve of his visit, Scholz had overridden widespread objections from within the German political and security establishments and approved the purchase by Chinese state-owned giant Costco of 25% of the terminal at the port of Hamburg. Martin Brudelmüller, the CEO of BASF, that's building a $10 billion chemical complex in southern China, who was part of Scholz's delegation, said Germans should step away from China bashing and look at ourselves a bit self-critically. Tanzania's leader signed 15 strategic agreements with China. China has been the chief funder with $40 million US of the Julius Nyerere Leadership School in Tanzania, loosely based on the Chinese Communist Party's party schools. 120 cadres from 6 parties that have ruled their African countries continuously since independence have participated in the first training module there, led by the CCP's International Liaison Department. She wrote that to the participants that his party hoped they would take an active part in the cause of China-Africa friendship and cooperation. Patricia Mola, a former American ambassador to Guinea and Burundi, said, "The Chinese are not in Africa to teach rice paper painting." Some commentators have claimed to detect that Beijing has been distancing itself from Russia since the Ukraine invasion. It's very difficult to see evidence for this, however. Vladimir Putin, who signed with Xi the No Limits Pact between Russia and China in February, reaffirmed on October the 27th that Xi has called me his friend, and I consider him as such, and noted that relations between the countries have reached an unprecedented level of openness, mutual trust, and effectiveness, especially in military technology. And China's foreign ministry spokesman, Wang Wenbin, responded, "We highly appreciate the positive remarks made by President Putin. Faced with a world of change and disorder, China-Russia relations have maintained the momentum of robust development." It doesn't sound like rowing back from that relationship. The leaders newly appointed by Beijing to Hong Kong excitedly hosted last week a global financial leaders investment summit where the chiefs of Morgan Stanley, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs and the like queued to praise the great re-emerging opportunities to get rich in and from Hong Kong and Beijing. John Lee, the former police chief, now turned chief executive of Hong Kong, boasted, we will remain one of the world's leading finance centers. You can take that to the bank. The worst is behind us. The UBS chairman, Colin Kelleher, pledged, we are all very pro-China. At the same time, in West Kowloon Court, a couple of kilometres away, Principal Magistrate Peter Law told Chow Hang-tuk, the woman who has organised many regular peaceful vigils in Hong Kong to commemorate June 4th, the Tiananmen massacre victims, that she was forbidden from using the word massacre or even killing in the court where she was being tried after 2 colleagues had already been jailed under the all-encompassing national security law imposed 17 months ago. But the post-Congress push isn't entirely positive. We've seen Gao Lanjiao, a Chinese diplomat who 2 years ago assaulted a Taiwanese diplomat outside the Grand Pacific Hotel in Suva during the October 10 celebrations there. And interestingly, of course, the Taiwan National Day actually commemorates the Xinhai Revolution, which triggered the downfall of the Qing dynasty in China, but we won't go any further than that. Anyway, so this diplomat who punched up a Taiwanese diplomat in Suva played a leading role in a violent brawl outside the Chinese consulate in Manchester, England, over Hong Kong democracy protests. But how interesting that we've seen this week Justin Trudeau warn that China is playing aggressive games with Canadian democracy and institutions. The Global Times said in response, Canada is risking drawing fire to itself. It said, young Westerners' confidence in democracy is declining, it posted. We've also seen the Chinese diplomats demand the Belgian Foreign Minister Hadja Labib retract comments she made about an academic report on Chinese investments in Belgian port infrastructure, in which she said, China is a partner, a rival, and a potential enemy. Civilian ships are being modified to potentially become military ships. We have to think about it and be very careful. Wolfgang, the Minister Councillor in Belgium, warned that maritime trade, economic activity between our ports is a lucrative activity for Belgium, which must be respected if it intends to continue. China's senior foreign affairs official Wang Yi has restated remarks made several times this year by Chinese diplomats that China and Australia should meet each other halfway. It's not entirely clear where this halfway point stands, but Beijing does now insist that Canberra should act first to relax national interest rules for foreign investment that have kept some Chinese deals out, to halt anti-dumping measures against Chinese firms, particularly in the steel area, and to support China's joining the CPTPP. So in recent discussions I've had with Chinese representatives, it's clear that Beijing views the halfway motion chiefly as an indication that both should move towards each other in the same direction. And they're confident this is already happening, that the new administration in Canberra is already leaning closer to Beijing in the traditional Labour governments, and it anticipates that Albanese will meet Xi during the G20 summit in Bali next Tuesday or Wednesday. Engagement is no longer a useful template for relating to this behemoth, with China resigning from being a ready partner as it sets itself increasingly apart, including economically. Every country on earth must find a way to live alongside China, preferably beneficially, while retaining full sovereignty, since the party believes its security can only ultimately be guaranteed by restraining other sovereignty, especially in our region. But I believe Canberra remains consistent and concerned. Prime Minister Albanese says, we will cooperate with China where we can, but we will stand up for Australian values where we must. That's something China needs to come to terms with. We need to stay the course. As long as the commercial coercion persists, he's made clear, Australia can't support China's CPTPP entry. Foreign Minister Wong uses the word stabilisation as her hope for the relationship rather than the unrealistic dream of a reset. And she emphasises the centrality of ASEAN, which Kevin Rudd has described as the swing state in the battle for regional dominance between the US and China. Wong says the ASEAN states don't want to have to take the binary route to choose between the two great powers. They want to exercise their own agency in how the region is reshaped. And she urges Pacific Island, as well as ASEAN leaders, to attempt to shape a settling point between the US and China, while also commending Rudd's desire for managed strategic competition between the two powers. Meanwhile, the private sector is entering a long winter in China as the property and tech sectors continue to come under the cosh from Beijing. Productivity growth slows to a crawl, consumer demand atrophies, youth unemployment exceeds 20%, and fertility rates have fallen to their lowest in 6 decades. The days of China rising are over. It's now flatlining at best. It is getting old before getting rich, and the party will be leaning ever more towards national security for its legitimacy. And the sense of this is now starting to filter into Australian consciousness beyond Canberra. At a recent meeting I attended with some senior corporate figures, it was clear that they now perceive China as a risk to be managed rather than as an opportunity to be seized. Most of the world, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, is seeking to hedge its relations with both China and America. Australia, at the federal level particularly, and the US are working ever harder, increasingly with our Quad and AUKUS partners and other groupings, to encourage countries to hedge closer to us. To become partners of choice, we need to be viewed as offering trusted, enduring collaboration, not just transactional deals that may or may not wind up getting implemented. That may prove challenging given the uncertain character of current US as British politics, but it's a crucial challenge to pursue. We need to ensure that our story about how best to become peaceful and prosperous wins. It's pressing that we succeed, but it can't happen overnight. It requires building habits of coordination and cooperation. We can't surge into interoperability. A mere 9 years ago, Julia Gillard delivered her Australia in the Asian Century white paper, in which China took centre stage in a scenario of engagement that was portrayed as benign and enriching. What's happening with China now is affecting the whole world. It's not an Australian issue. It's a challenge to us and to all free societies. 10 years ago, after Xi came to power, he visited Shenzhen, next to Hong Kong, the symbolic home of Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up era. This time, a few days after the recent Congress, Xi led his new Politburo Standing Committee to Yan'an in Shanxi province, where the CCP retreated and rebuilt at the end of the Long March in 1935, and where Mao built his personal dominance. Hu Ping, a US-based political commentator who lived through the Cultural Revolution, said Yan'an was where the red sun rose. It was where Mao established his supreme authority. Xi's trip was not only a salute to Mao, but was to show that Xi, the new red sun, has risen. Who, however, is now on the right side of history, a line Xi loves to use when grooming developing country leaders like Solomon Islands Manasseh Sobibari. The answer may emerge soon enough, as Xi's challenges keep piling up. A Chinese friend recently sent me an intriguing ancient saying that he felt apposite for the troubled times that appear to lie ahead, maybe in the not so distant future. When the scroll reaches the end, the knife comes out. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask the first question, which actually is a compilation of some of the ones that we've had online. And it relates to your opening statement about Xi's belief that the Chinese economy is bulletproof. You describe a number of things that Xi is doing, the common prosperity drive, zero COVID, anti-corruption measures, the preferencing of political commitment over technical capability, and also, not to mention, losing friends abroad potentially. So, in your view, is the Chinese economy bulletproof? And if it's not, is it going to undermine the social contract within China of continual enrichment of its people? And if that starts to unravel, are we likely to see the beginning of greater disharmony within China that will cause more problems for the party?
I think they've sussed this out to an extent, Richard, already. So first of all, I would agree. I think the economy is flatlining. We'll see it in the next few years. Sometimes Australia's economy will grow faster than China's. Sometimes theirs will grow an amount faster now, but it's no longer that double-digit type of growth. And the people in China who've already worked hard, saved, educated their kids to rebuild their family's prosperity, which is what we've seen happening. Those who haven't succeeded in doing this will start to feel frustrated. The opportunities for new people to do this will be much less. So the party is aware of this. And this social contract is at stake. COVID has actually interesting acted as a convenient sort of breaking point. So much can be blamed on COVID. And during this time, the shift that's been made by the party towards basing its legitimacy on defending what we have in China, making sure that the good things that we have will be retained, and that China will remain a successful, prosperous place, stable place to live, unlike other places in the world. And so there will be less emphasis in that legitimation on the economy just because it's not going to work. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to seize Taiwan to do that. You know, because China has, the government has huge powers of surveillance, control, and control of opinion, media, and so on. And I sincerely believe most people in China support Xi Jinping right now, and so they're going along with that for now, and they're seeing the change of direction in terms of what the party's doing for us. Not so much just making us rich, but making us safe as being an important thing. But as the unemployment grows and so on, questions will start to be asked, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Where's our microphone? So we'll start off then, Patrick.
Xi's locked up a lot of very powerful people on the actual perceived corruption. And he's humiliating a lot of other people. Has he made enemies that could in any way challenge him, or does he have complete support from the members of the government?
I think I'm not going to bet against it. You're right, he's made a lot of enemies. People talk of 1 million people being found corrupt by whatever, either the party's own Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection, or from the new National Supervisory Commission, or through the courts, some other means. So that's a lot of people affected, and for instance, 100 generals seem to have been booted. So she's quite brave, you have to say, in pursuing this very popular move, because the party, clearly party elders felt when they chose him above Li Keqiang to be the new General Secretary, they felt persuaded by Xi's case that we need a real shake-up. We really need to get things back in order, back to the good old days, because we're losing credibility amongst ordinary people. So the anti-corruption thing has been popular. He has made many enemies, but for now, they don't really have any route for revenging themselves on him. Guo Shuai, his biggest enemy, the two Bo and Xi families, famously at odds for generations, is in a jail somewhere north of Beijing for life. But he's still alive there. I couldn't say that it's impossible for some of these people to have their revenge, but the route to doing that is quite tough now.
Patrick Warren, a member of the AAA. You all talked about China as a singular entity. In the last couple of hundred years of world history, for any country to be really great, we always had allies, of course, except Germany. But look at the history of the last 250 years. Any country rising, maintaining a strong position has had allies. Who might be, who can be China's ally?
Okay. So China does have an ally. It's EPRK. North Korea is its formal ally. They have an alliance. So if someone attacks the EPRK, China will come to the defense and vice versa. So, but I don't think China really feels that this is so terribly helpful. what is more helpful is the Belt and Road Initiative network. So that is kind of using that, what I said, weaponization of China's economic heft, which is declining rapidly because it's based on loans, and China's banks are increasingly concerned that the Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap for them. Borrowers have talked about a debt trap, but for China's banks also, because they're being required to pour money into stimulus programs at home as well, bridges to nowhere in order to try and get the economy going again. So this is a very difficult time, but they have succeeded in building patterns of dependence on China in terms of protocols, regulations, internet platforms, high-speed rail, and so all of these. And so you can see in the United Nations votes, China has no problem in summoning votes, and many of those, or I would say perhaps all of them, are votes from Belt and Road partners. So they're not allies, they're not going to fight, but that's useful.
Robert, it's Martin. You mentioned briefly the population decline, and I'm coming to think that it's a more and more significant issue. I mean, China has turned from a one-child policy to a two-child policy, and now good quality party members must promise to have 3 children. So something is going on here, and I've recently been reading John Aiken's Fertility Trap, and he statistically demonstrates that the one-child policy had almost no impact on the declining fertility in China. And a worldwide trend is that fertility will drop catastrophically in the next 3 decades. Do you think China's leaders are aware of this issue?
Yes, that's a great question, Martin. I think, yeah, they are aware. I think it's they were kind of caught by surprise. They thought that they're pretty good social engineers, and that when they took the one child, of course, one child has always been a partial thing, didn't apply to rural areas, it's urban, blah, blah, blah. But when they allowed everyone to have 2 children and 3, they thought that that form of social engineering could work as well. They told people to have more children, they're not. And what they found is it's much easier to prevent women from having children than it is to force them to have children. And I think this has come as a surprise, and certainly I agree. This is, and there's an increasing amount of literature about this, written outside and inside China about the effect of this. Of course, before this, Mao Zedong talked of populate or perish, so there was a larger population, so there's a huge overhang of aunties and uncles who are hanging off this one child who's going to have to be hugely productive. One answer is massively increased productivity, but that's not happening. Productivity rate is flatlining as well. So this is indeed a big problem. Japan got rich before it got old. So Japan, same kind of problem, and Korea, same kind of problem. But they, and also Japan at least, and Korea to an extent, are talking about migration, about encouraging people to come, bringing other populations in. China doesn't do this. China makes it very difficult for people to become citizens, people to go to the country, and so this is going to be a huge issue economically. It's going to be an issue for the military. It's going to be a big thing. 2030, people say India will have a bigger population than China, because India has a problem in that many of the new people joining the workforce are not so well educated. That's a challenge for India, a bit different. But for China, it's a kind of existential question.
Martin Stewart Fox. Xi Jinping describes his guiding ideology as Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. For Xi, history is enormously important. Which of those characteristics have drawn from history, and in your view, what are the most important?
Oh dear. So we've got Professor Delia Lin in the room who can probably answer that question much better than I, because I'm sure she's spent many enjoyable hours studying the ways in which she points out the Chinese characteristics. I think actually the Chinese characteristics just mean whatever I say. I think it defaults. I don't think there's much, theoretical innovation. Despite I read that comment from the work report, there's no end to theoretical innovation. Actually, it's rhetorical innovation, but I'm not really convinced that it's theoretical innovation. So it means we adhere to Marxism because also we've studied what happened to the USSR. We realize that our view is what happened there was they turned their back on Stalin, they turned their back on Lenin, and we're not going to turn our back on our founding fathers. We're not going to turn our back on our founding principles, of which Marxism is there. And so we've got to keep that there while also being pragmatic to an extent, as they have been in allowing private ownership. They're kind of walking back from that in a quite clever way by introducing party branches, making sure that party branches are present in every private company, and so on. So we have a sort of hybrid system that they feel will work. It's not how China grew fast in the last 40 years. It's something that we'll have to see whether that's going to work for the next 40 years. But yeah, I think if you talk to Professor Lin afterwards, she would probably be able to provide more good examples of the Chinese characteristics. As I said, I'm not convinced that they're that theoretical, they're more rhetorical.
Prakash Merchandani, a member of the council here at the Institute. Rowan Bex, I enjoyed your contributions at the National Conference and here. Something that struck me and a couple of other people at the conference, there was a lot of talk about China and its role in Australia and the region, but very few people talked about how India did this. I'm glad you mentioned it. There's no parochial interest here. No. None at all. So you mentioned the demographics. I think that's very important. But you also said that there's a stream of uneducated people coming into the workforce. Flip side of the coin is that 7 of the top American corporations are now headed at the very top by Indian-born CEOs, and more, including Starbucks, which surprised me. And how do you see this rise of India, if you want to call it that, impacting China's self-perception or how it moves forward? Second, what's in it for China in constantly invading Indian territory? What can you do with it? What are the gain out of it? And what's the justification in their minds?
Well, go to the second one. Justification in their minds is that India occupies Chinese territories. So China does not want to share the Tibet plateau with them. And it's convinced that it is right in terms of those territorial disputes. And China has not taken India terribly seriously, I think. it takes the United States terribly seriously and is constantly concerned, worried about, thinks about the United States, and kind of feels that the rest don't have too much agency. India is a perplexing one for China because India clearly does have agency. It's got size and it is not entirely predictable in its foreign policy directions, for example. So I think it's got a lot of news. So I think, watch this space, Prakash. I think that this is going to be a very interesting area. And Modi is quite a key member of the Quad. I think one has to take that quite seriously.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's come to the end of our time. It's been absolutely fascinating. Yet again, Rona, we can't thank you enough. So please, we can.
And if anyone wants to know what really happened when Putin left, you can see this beautiful illustration explaining the real story as drafted by A.A. Milne.